to get into that, let's say a little bit how it came about. Sure. After we left the moon and started home, my responsibilities were largely completed at that point. We no longer had the lunar spacecraft that had been crashed into the moon for a seismic experiment to ring the seismometer to get deep seismic data from inside the moon. So our mission was complete, and we were headed home, and I could relax a little bit. So I got the opportunity to look out the window, and we were oriented and rotating such that every 2 minutes, and this rotation was to keep thermal balance on the spacecraft. So every 2 minutes, the Earth, the moon, the sun, and a 360-degree panorama of the heavens came into the spacecraft window. And that's really a powerful experience, because looking at the heavens from that perspective, they're 10 times as bright and 10 times as many stars as you can ever see from Earth. So it's an overwhelming experience. And I had as I looked at this, from my studies of astronomy at Harvard and MIT, where I studied astronomy to get my doctorate, I realized that the molecules of my body and the molecules in the spacecraft and my partner's bodies had been prototyped and perhaps manufactured in some ancient generation of stars. And suddenly that was very personal. Instead of being an intellectual knowledge, those were my molecules. And it was a visceral experience, an overwhelmingly powerful visceral experience, and accompanied by a bliss and ecstasy. And I never had that type of experience before. All of the astronauts that have been to the moon have had some similar type experience. And a book's been written about it called The Overview Effect. And it really is a description from the interviews from quite a number of us who have seen Earth from space, and what I call the big picture effect. He called it the overview effect. And it's this notion of wonder and awe at seeing the universe and seeing life on Earth from that point of view. And we've all had something similar to what I just described. As I did research on what is the nature of this experience I had in space, I had to appeal to some anthropologists that did some research for me into ancient thought systems and ancient cultures, and came up with understanding from the ancient Sanskrit language the concept of Salvakapa Samadhi. And I asked, what is that? Well, that is a state of mind in which you see things in their separateness, but experience them viscerally as a unity, as a oneness, and accompanied by ecstasy and bliss. And I said, well, that's exactly what I felt in space. And the more I dug into that concept and talked with leadership in different cultures, the mystics, spiritual leaders in different religions and different cultures, I came to realize that that type of experience is the basis of all religion. It's a transcendental, transformational, transcendent experience which catapults you out of the normal ego ways of thinking. And it's the basis of all religion. But religions are culturally oriented, and as time has gone on in the past, even though the ancients had this type of experience, unless you've had that type of experience, you get pulled away into politics, economics, and other such things, and the central message gets lost. So my notion in consciousness studies was to bring this idea and understand it, and use the tools of science to help understand these types of consciousness experiences. It made me realize is that since we were the first generation of spacefarers from Earth, and humans forever have been asking the deep questions about who are we, how do we get here, what's our relationship to the cosmos, and I realized that our story of ourselves as told by science was likely incomplete and perhaps flawed, And the story of ourselves as told by our cultural traditions, normally rooted in religion, were archaic and perhaps flawed. And maybe we, as the first generation of spacefarers, probably needed to be thinking about these deep questions all over again from a new point of view. And that was what was going through my mind. And as I thought about that, and after the fact, after the flight, and started to understand this experience that happened in space, I realized that what we were dealing with was the nature of consciousness. Why are we conscious? And of course, being trained in the sciences and in technologies, I quickly realized that studies of consciousness and mind had not been a part of science for the last 400 years, since the time of René Descartes and Newton, when Descartes postulated that body, mind, physicality, spirituality belong to different realms of reality. Now that served the noble purpose of getting the Inquisition of the period of the Roman Church off the backs of the intellectuals in Europe, and so that science, as we understand it, classical Newtonian science, arose as long as they stayed away from mind, consciousness, and such things that were considered realm of the church. And we have labored under that for 400 years with science as a materialist science, but without at all asking the deep question in science, what's mind and consciousness all about? And I realized that it was time to change that. And that was the beginning of my idea for the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which I've now spent 36 years building up.
The IONS overview page has a detailed description of who IONS is, what IONS does, and what is IONS' goal.
For 44 years, the Institute of Noetic Sciences has forged the frontier of a deeper understanding of how consciousness interacts with our world, and how we can harness that power to help humanity and the planet thrive. Founded by Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell, IONS embodies the adventurer spirit. Today, we are the largest multidisciplinary team working on some of the most profound questions involving consciousness. We are boldly pushing the boundaries of our understanding of what it means to be human, marrying rigorous scientific exploration and intergenerational programs with noetic inner awareness. The key to creating a sustainable future is to gain a more complete understanding of consciousness. How does it work? And how can we leverage its awesome, expansive power? We, as one species of many on this planet, must find that middle way of science and our personal inner knowing. It is time to come full circle and forge forward, moving past fear and the illusion of separation, and see the beauty and fullness of each and every being. We must be bold in our exploration. Join us as we gain a deeper understanding of consciousness and embrace our interconnection.
The Institute realizes its mission through 4 categories of work: science, experience, community, and Earthrise. We will explore each in turn. The first is science. The foundational hypothesis guiding all of ION's scientific research is that everything is interconnected, and that embodying that awareness reveals information and energy not limited by space and time, which can create breakthroughs in transformation, innovation, and well-being. Following from this, ION's research programs focus on three primary questions. How are we interconnected? Can we access information not limited by space and time? And does that create breakthroughs in transformation, innovation, and well-being? The various research projects currently underway in each of these themes are listed with hyperlinks for deeper access on the Research Projects page. To inquire into how are we interconnected, Research Focus 1 asks, what is the role of consciousness in the physical world? 6 specific studies are currently underway to answer this. Let's take a look at 2 of them. Lauren Carpenter is conducting the missing photon experiment that asks, does attention focused on a laser beam produce measurable scattering? Can we build an instrument to reliably detect attention, intention, and consciousness outside of the body? And Julia Mossbridge is asking, can people tell the difference between a robot embedded artificial intelligence that is designed to express unconditional love and a regular AI without this piece? How can we make future AI technology focused on love and compassion? To inquire into, can we access information not limited by space and time, the studies in Focus 2 ask, what characteristics allow us to access information and energy from beyond time and space? What tools can we use to access information and energy from beyond time and space more easily? 2 pages list these studies. Here is about 2 of these. Dean Radin, IONS chief scientist, is inquiring if our genetics play a role in psychic perception by comparing DNA samples from vetted psychics with those of controls matched by age, gender, and race. Julia Mossbridge and Arnaud Delorme are asking, what is the distribution of psychic abilities in the general population? Are there highly skilled individuals that can be recruited for future ION studies of psi? To do this, they're using PsyQ, a smartphone application available to the general public with psi games for psychokinesis, precognition, and clairvoyance. We'll take a look at this smartphone app later in this presentation. Finally, to inquire into whether studies such as these create breakthroughs in transformation, innovation, and well-being, the current studies in Focus 3 ask, what is the role of consciousness in mental and physical health? The 2 of these studies that we will highlight here are Consciousness and Breast Cancer, in which IONS Director of Research, Halane Wabe, is exploring links between life traumas and breast cancer risk. And Spiritual Competencies for Mental Health Professionals, in which IONS President, Cassandra Vietan, is assessing interest of mental health professionals in overcoming barriers to inclusion of spiritual competency in the field of psychology and other mental health professions. In addition to publicizing their research in peer-reviewed scientific journals and professional conference papers, scientists at IONS contribute a wide range of presentations to the public, many of which can be seen online. For example, here are 2 engaging presentations, beginning with an edited TEDx presentation by IONS President Cassandra Vietan.
The institute where I conduct most of my research was founded by the Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who was an MIT-trained engineer and a Navy pilot, and the sixth man to walk on the moon. He's also one of 6 surviving individuals who have been further from our planet than any other human being has in the history of humanity. And so his trip to the moon, of course, was an awesome journey, but it was the trip home that really changed the rest of his life. And as Edgar puts it, and so this sense of interconnectedness flooded through his system, and it was a direct download, he felt like, from the universe, a subjective form of knowing, but an absolutely authoritative knowledge all the same. Not only did he feel this sense of interconnectedness, he also saw that there was an intelligence behind everything. There was almost a sacredness or divinity infusing every single thing he saw, a luminosity. And so when Edgar got back to Earth, he spent the rest of his life and is spending the rest of his life trying to make sense of what happened to him. And part of the way he's doing that is by founding the Institute of Noetic Sciences in 1973, where I'm now the director of research. So Edgar's not the first person on the planet to have had this experience, of course. There have been people throughout millennia who have recorded experiences like this, repeated experiences, actually thousands and thousands of people, and they have given birth to some of the world's greatest religions. So not only have these kinds of subjective experiences of oneness and interconnection, this realization about the nature of reality being completely interconnected started religions, they've also underlied entire movements. Do that. And so science now is a way that we are increasingly relying on more and more instead of religion, or in addition to religion, to understanding the nature of reality and what things are really like and what our potential is. And so I'm engaged in a scientific effort to look into this phenomenon of interconnectedness. Is it true that we are, in fact, interconnected, not only at a subjective level, but maybe at an objective or a physical level? Are we more I, or are we more we, or are we both? Is there any way to investigate this paradox that makes sense in the natural world? And so first I'll start with telling you a little bit about what science is telling us about just the interconnection in our own bodies. All of that is maybe what you could call traditional science. It's looking into more and more the ways that we are socially interconnected. What we're engaged in at the Institute of Noetic Sciences takes it one step further, where we're not only looking at how people are connected through traditional ways of knowing through the 5 senses, but also beyond that. Is there a way that we're interconnected that isn't through traditional connection? And so what we do in one set of experiments, for example, is we get a pair of people and we separate them. We take one person to a sender's chamber where they sit in front of a closed-circuit television or now an internet live stream, and they're shown their partner on the screen off and on. Now, the sender might be hooked up to autonomic measures or brainwave measures as well. But then we escort the receiver to a 2,000-pound electromagnetically shielded steel box. So they are sitting there protected from any influence, including that their partner might send on a traditional level. And so here we are having the sender shown the image of the person, and when they're shown the image of the person who's the receiver, they're asked to direct all their attention and intention toward that person. When the person goes off the screen, they're asked to remove their intention and attention from that person. And what's fascinating is that what we're finding is when the sender sends that attention, intention, thought toward the person in the receiving chamber, the physiology of the person in the receiving chamber actually changes. And so we don't really have an explanation for this yet, but we do have now dozens of studies showing evidence for this connection. This is a slide from a different laboratory looking at how the brain reacts to a light flash, and what you see across the top is right in the middle The sender has a light flash, and their brain has a major reaction to that light flash, but you'll also see that their partner below has a little echo of that light flash. And so we haven't explained this yet, but it is very enticing information about how we might be interconnected. These experiments were pioneered by Marilyn Schlitz and others at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. We did an experiment where we brought in cancer patients and their partners and asked their partners to learn a compassionate intention intervention that was based on Tibetan practices. And after the training, what we found is that their connection at a distance, again, was increased. And so another way we're looking at interconnection is not just between people, it's between people's minds and the physical world. So this is an ingenious experiment that was developed by my colleague Dean Radin. And so what we know in quantum physics is that when we have a stream of light, a stream of photons that's being shot down a tunnel through two little slits, this is called the double slit experiment, when someone knows which slit the photons go through, when someone observes it or a machine observes it, the photons act like particles. When nothing is observing it, they act like waves. And you know that because you can see the pattern on the back wall. There's either two slits or there's a wave refraction pattern. So this is called the quantum measurement problem. We don't know why measurement or observation changes this. What we do in our laboratory is we have people look at the system only using their minds. So they're not using their eyes, they're not using a camera, they're not using any kind of the traditional measurement equipment. They're just observing the system, you could say psychically or clairvoyantly. They're projecting their minds into the system. And what we find is that when they're doing that, it collapses the wave function. In other words, the particles, the light stream, the photons, act more like particles than they do like waves, as though they were being observed in person. So again, both of these experiments, we don't know exactly what to make of the results, but we do know that, number one, the effect seems to be instantaneous. It happens at exactly the same time, so it doesn't seem to be sort of like sending an email or sending a letter. We also know that it appears to be non-local, so it doesn't matter that much if the person is 40 feet away or 400 or 4,000 or 400 miles away from either the receiver, who's a human, or from the double slit experiment. The final way I'll share with you, and there are other ways that we are looking at this phenomenon, is a set of colleagues and us are looking at whether collective upheavals in consciousness affect systems that are physical. And we use a random number generator, which is a little machine that spits out a series of zeros and ones at the rate of about 800 bits per second. And the idea is that if there is greater coherence in a collective group of people, you could say like a baseball game, we looked at things like 9/11, we've looked at the opening ceremonies, the Olympics, when lots and lots and lots of people's attention are focused on one thing. Is there a little departure from randomness in this stream of random numbers? And what we find is that, in fact, there is a tiny departure from randomness that seems to correlate with exactly the same time that there are these huge upheavals in consciousness. So while tiny, the change is highly statistically improbable. So this is the kind of thing we're investigating, using the tools of science to look into connection and interconnection, both in person with each other and from a distance. And you might ask yourself, well, this is all fascinating, but why? Why does this matter? I mean, other than the fact that maybe it's, questioning the very fundamental basis of the nature of reality, why do we care? Well, what brings me to do this work is that when we look at this interconnection, when we study the interconnection among people, if it is in fact the case that our minds influence our bodies, which we now know to be true, if it's the case that we influence each other much more than we ever thought was possible when we're in rooms with each other, when we watch each other on the TV, if it's even possible that we're connected at a distance, or maybe that we collectively are somehow connected to the way the physical world functions, then one of the things we can do is shift the way we are thinking. We can use our consciousness in ways that are constructive, innovative, reverent. We can bring positive influence into our world. And it's not enough to just think positively, but I do believe that that kind of using our consciousness, recognizing that our consciousness matters, is a precursor to the kind of action we all need to take to help our world thrive, to help humanity reach its full potential. And this is a quote from the Institute of Noetic Sciences' first president. Because of the interconnectedness of all minds, affirming a positive vision might be the most sophisticated vision that any one of us can take. Thank you.
And as an example of the types of personal experiences that IONS researchers are inspired by, here is an incredible story by IONS chief scientist in a younger day.
So I will tell you a synchronicity story that happened to me, which is one of the strangest things I've heard of. I've heard many synchronicity stories. And it does lend itself to something like an explanation. And who knows if that's correct. But okay, so this is, it's the year 2000, and me and a couple of partners start a nonprofit called the Boundary Institute. And we're looking for a place to have the offices. And at the time, Silicon Valley was doing really well. It was before the dot-com crash. And so finding office space was very expensive. And so we look all over the place, and we finally find some place in Los Altos, which is an office complex which have doctors and dentists and accountants and those sort of professional things all clustered together in this one place. So we rent a place, and we notice at probably about the same day that we rented it, that our next door neighbor, everyone has a plaque on the outside of their place. It said SciQuest Labs, PSI Quest Labs, right next to us. So we thought, well, that's a curious thing. You know, we're thinking PSI in that case is Personnel Services Incorporated or something like that, because like we're the only nonprofit that especially new, and certainly in Silicon Valley, is doing psi research. We thought, well, okay, that seems like a nice coincidence. But there's nobody in there. The curtains were closed. There was no one in there, so we couldn't even introduce ourselves. So about a month goes by, and I'm living close enough so I can walk to work. So I walked to work a certain way and decided this day I'm going to walk a different way. I wanted to see what some of the other places were that were in this complex. So I walk a different way, and now I pass an office that said SciQuest Inc. So I'm thinking, oh, well, these must be part of the other people. There's no one in here either, so I don't know what it is. So I'm thinking, well, it's still a coincidence. We don't know what they are. So in the offices now, we have something like 4 or 5 rooms. My office is up against the wall, which is abutting the SciQuest Labs. And I put my whiteboard, it says like my whiteboard is over here and the SciQuest Labs on the other side. I have no idea what they do. And I'm drawing on the board what I want our lab to look like. So I want a certain shielded room, and I want a certain chair in it, and I want certain things in it, and I'm drawing on the board and thinking about it a lot. And we don't have very much of anything else in the lab at this point because we're just new. So every day now I'm walking past SciQuest Labs and hoping there's somebody in there because I want to introduce ourselves and tell them about the joke of what we do. So finally I see somebody in there and knock on the door, and the person opens the door and I say, "Hi, my name is," and I thought he was going to have a heart attack because he opens the door, his mouth drops open, and before I can introduce myself, he said, "Dean Radin?" And now, of course, I'm confused because how could he know who I am? Because we have never met before. I don't recognize this guy. So the reason he looked so shocked is because he was actually back in the room somewhere back there, engaged in a yoga practice in which you manifest things. So he had been spending the last 2 months manifesting me. He wanted to get in contact with me. Why? because SciQuest Labs was his laboratory portion of actual sci research, just like we were doing. And the other place was his office. It was his office, and this is his laboratory. And he is his own for-profit sci research lab, of which there's probably no other one like it anywhere in the world. So the guy who started this, his name is John Krakauer. He's the guy who developed the Apple PowerBook. So he did pretty well at Apple. He cashed out, and he decided he wanted to do what he always wanted to do, which was to do sci research. But in order to both get money and to develop his business, he wanted to attract certain people to be on his board of directors, including me. He had no idea that I was in Silicon Valley. He had certainly no idea that we just put a place next to his lab. So after he got over the shock, and after I got over the shock, because when he told me this, I felt very disoriented. Like, what do you mean you were dreaming me into existence? I thought I had free will and just came over to the door. So he said, well, do you want to see the lab? Yeah, I want to see the lab. So we go inside, and we go around the corner, and this is the box that I was drawing on my wall. And this box, this laboratory, which is a shielded room with a certain kind of chair in it, like a captain's chair, a bunch of stuff in there. This is on the other side of the wall where I was drawing so I was kind of manifesting, or clairvoyance, what I wanted, which was there. It was like right next door. And this freaked us out majorly. And then so I told the other people and the other members of our group, and they all freaked out. I mean, because this is impossible. There are no cases. It's like a probability of 0 that you can't have this sort of thing happen. So John and I were thinking then, well, how could this synchronicity possibly have occurred? And we thought that it actually seems a lot like a gravitational attraction. That we both have very high intensity. He's drawing me in. I'm literally drawing what I want. And it's as though we're like, your intentions are a gravitational density that pull things together. So we're like orbiting around each other, orbiting, and eventually we settle together just like you would in deep space. The things clump together because the intensity of the intention is warping space-time. And we end up 2 psi research places in the world next to each other, right next to each other. So, who knows what's really going on there, but very strong intention on his part, very strong intention on our part to do what we wanted, to what I wanted, which was the lab next door. Because now we didn't have to do anything because I drew it in and he drew me in, and that's the strangest synchronicity that I know of.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So I've heard a lot of other people with stories like this, and it's meaningful to the individual. This one is strange on its own rights because of the a priori unlikelihood of 2 things like this clumping together right next to each other. So it's like intention and gravity, mass, something. If it really is consciousness that's emerging into the world at large, and you have 2 very high intentions that are manipulating consciousness emerging into the world, and it does create something like a gravitational vortex that sucks it together.
And here is an early IONS success story in consciousness education.
How do I know what I know?
What do I believe?
What's my purpose?
One of the most powerful steps a person can take to achieve their highest potential is the willingness and ability to understand new perspectives. The Worldview Explorations Project is a research-based, experiential program for middle, high school, and college students.
I had never even thought about my perception of the world changing how I interact with other people.
This program presents practical tools to explore the inner and outer landscapes in which we live from fresh perspectives and new points of view. This program is designed to inspire curiosity, shift our perspectives, and create new ways to interact with one another and the world. So what exactly is a worldview?
Everyone has different views of the world. The way you look at things, the way you think about things, the way you react to things.
The lens through which you see the world.
Worldview Exploration's 22 interactive experiential lessons for middle school, high school, and college classrooms provide learners with tools and skills that build their capacity to discover themselves, inspire others, and engage in the world.
You know, we spend a lot of our time trying to figure out, who am I and who do I want to be? At the same time, we're balancing who we are told to be and who we think we should be.
Where do you believe stereotypes come from?
I feel like people stereotype so that way they can be more comfortable with what they don't know and put it into a category of something that they do know.
When learners explore their own worldviews, they build the capacity to make choices based on their own values, to find meaning and purpose, and to connect with others in a new way.
You know, this project deals with exploring your own worldview and then moves into exploring other people's worldviews.
The more people encounter and engage with other worldviews, the more they develop self-reflection and compassionate understanding.
And how can we begin to connect with each other from the perspective of people who are taking off the glasses and then looking at each other and saying, hey, this is how I see the world. How do you see the world?
It bothers me when people aren't open to other things. They think that every other culture is just bad.
Instead of seeing these disagreements as a point of contention, something to fight about, if you look at it as something interesting, then that would alleviate a lot of, argument or violence.
I think sometimes we walk around on this earth completely oblivious to the interconnectedness of everything.
The more we recognize our connectedness with the planet and those living on it, the more we will be motivated to engage in action and leadership for the greater good.
Our goal is to create scalable global classrooms where our students can explore the world around them.
What do you think about the world of tomorrow?
These experiences have definitely made me pretty optimistic about the future.
Imagine a world where we become global learners. Invite our children to join us, to have the conversation that matters, to see them as the new global citizens, the visionaries and the architects of the world to come, the kind of world we all choose to live in.
You can read more about this project and purchase a facilitator guide and workbook at the World Explorations Overview page of the Institute's website. IONS experiential offerings are intended to help you find inspirational ways to bring the science of what connects us into your life. Noetic Infusions is the name that IONS has chosen as a way to refer to its experiential programs that are currently offered. This page, which you can find at noeticprograms.org, lists 5 different program areas: in-person workshops, e-learning, virtual gatherings, special events, and research participation. Each of them has its own web page listing featuring programs in that particular category. First of these is in-person workshops. 3 such workshops are featured there. The first, Consciousness, Communication, and Change, brings together leading research results and noetic wisdom practices that are useful for change agents. The second, Conscious Aging for Personal Enrichment, offers a variety of learning resources and tools to address challenges, experiences, and opportunities found in the later years to help elders increase their personal enrichment. The third, Noetic Leadership, provides a highly interactive and stimulating learning experience for leaders across a wide range of private and public sectors. IONS has many current offerings for electronically available learning. First is an online version of the C3 workshop on consciousness, communication, and change that was mentioned earlier. Next, an online approach for becoming a certified facilitator of the IONS Conscious Aging workshop series. Then, 2 offerings on the IONS Mindful Motherhood program, one for users such as pregnant women and new mothers, and a second one for healthcare professionals who wish to facilitate mindful motherhood groups or integrate components of the mindful motherhood training into their work with pregnant women and new moms. Consciousness for the Next Generation is a free online course featuring 10 one-hour video presentations for young persons considering a career in fields of consciousness research and study. Finally, the Future of Meditation Research is an upcoming webinar series that will consist of recorded presentations from leading meditation researchers intended to teach and train learners to conduct meditation research within an expanded set of domains, concepts, and protocols. And online virtual gatherings. The first of these, Noetic Global Gatherings, are a series of free online webinars and discussion groups for IONS community group participants and Noetic seekers worldwide. At the conclusion of each presentation and its Q&A, attendees have an opportunity to break into small discussion groups with Noetic explorers from around the world to share their own perspective and hear from others. The Consciousness for the Next Generation course mentioned earlier is also presented online as a virtual gathering. The upcoming Future of Meditation Research webinar series will be watched by different types of groups as virtual gatherings. Special IONS events. The 2019 IONS Conference will be held on July 18th through 21st, 2019 in Santa Clara, California. If interested in recordings of past IONS conferences, they can be accessed at the Past Conferences page of the IONS main website, shown here. The Noetic Leadership Speaker Series brings inspiring speakers for an interactive and stimulating learning experience for leaders across a wide range of private and public sectors. And the IONS cross-cultural journeys offer life-affirming experiences that will expand your worldview, demonstrate our interconnectedness, and inspire you to continue to work towards a world that works for all. There are too many research participation opportunities to cover in detail here, but please note you can conveniently participate in the Test Your PsyQ research by using the smartphone app we covered earlier. Meanwhile, you might want just to scan the list now in case you want to come back to any of them later. Finally, here are a number of books listed as More Tools for Transformation based on IONS research. Many people have found them a powerful source of transformative well-being in their lives and in their work in the world. They include Conscious Aging, Worldview Explorations, 7 Tools to Help Your Child Deal with Conflict, Spiritual and Religious Competencies in Clinical Practice, Living Deeply, Consciousness and Healing, At Home Within, a personal growth program for homeless adults, and Death Makes Life Possible. And the IONS Consciousness Transformation Model, which you can read about here. Moving on from science and experience to the community and Earthrise aspects of the IONS family of consciousness-oriented initiatives, IONS has a number of ways to participate in its growing global community that are listed in its community overview page. Chief among them is the global network of IONS community groups all over the world for whom this presentation is dedicated. You can locate them at noetic.org/community-groups. Earthrise, the fourth element in the IONS family of initiatives, is so named due to this image. It's a beautiful semi-rural retreat center for multi-day group retreats. It is a conscious living center that provides a gathering place to explore ancient wisdom traditions and to engage in experiential learning about all manner of noetic topics. You can find out more about it here. Now, let's take a look at the PsyQ app when it was still being developed at IONS' new innovation lab that is serving as a nonprofit early-stage R&D incubator at the Earthrise Center.
So this is Hackation, which is really an experiment, sort of like the idea of a hackathon on one side and a vacation on the other side.
What we're doing is working on PsyQ, which is a smartphone app that will let people on their smartphone test themselves on their psychic abilities.
I love being with all these people, and I would say many of them are already my friends.
We decided that we wanted to build an app, but we wanted to do it with a group of people who were committed to also not only working in the space of logic and rationality, but also who are interested in working in the space of compassion and heart and spirit and mind. And we found those people. I feel very lucky we found those people. It's very exciting.
What's happening here is people are voluntarily congealing. They're coming together with no immediate reward to forward an idea out into the general population, out into the world. They're not doing it to be popular, they're doing it because they believe in it. Ideas like that are exciting.
These ideas, which have been fringe for a long time, are actually beginning to become a bit more mainstream. And so now we're trying to bring the scientific community and also popular audience together to actually research this themselves.
The reason why PsyQ is an interesting app is because a lot of people are carrying around computers now on their hip that are practically as powerful as laptops or desktops. And it gives us the opportunity of collecting a huge amount of data from a lot of people.
I can tell you that the nature is amazing. The location is perfect. It's very conducive for this kind of event.
It's exciting to be around not only a bunch of smart people, but a bunch of people who are dedicated to bringing consciousness and a way of being into the work dynamic itself. So whatever's being created is actually being created from this space of consciousness expansion and larger awareness. So that sort of interaction makes not only the process itself fun, but the product itself also bigger and bolder.
The one that's going to be done in the future, about 3 years from now, that's going to show that you can use a combination of symbolic and non-symbolic mathematics to time travel.
One of my favorite experiments I read about, the book is called The Crack in the Cosmic Egg. I read it when I was young. He describes an experiment where under hypnosis, folks who had been fasting imagined the experience of eating a Thanksgiving feast, and supposedly their blood glucose levels went up 300% just as a result of that imagination or the influence of hypnotic suggestion. I've always been fascinated to replicate that experiment and then look at regulation of gene expression that would be associated with that. And I thought it would be a great way to isolate a subconscious event that was influencing epigenetics. What I'm excited about is that we're setting up the ability to do science on retreatants here at Earthrise. And so we have people sleeping here at our lab. So I'm going to be able to do those dreaming experiments.
Right now, I'm studying full trance channeling. I'm able to actually bring people who do this into the lab and hook them up to all of our equipment and then have them go in and out of this channeling state to try to figure out exactly what's going on. So to me, right now, in this moment, that is my favorite science experiment.
For a concluding summary of this presentation, let's go back to the basic overview page that we summarized at the beginning. Who we are. The Institute of Noetic Sciences is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting individual and collective transformation through consciousness research, transformative learning, and engaging a global community in the realization of our human potential. We conduct, advance, and broaden the science of what connects us, reaching new understandings about the nature of reality and our extended capacities. From what we learn, we create real-world tools that empower people to apply conscious awareness in their personal lives and in healthcare, education, and business. We host a vibrant community of explorers and change agents who are working together to make a difference in the world. Our goal is to create a shift in consciousness worldwide, where people recognize that we are all part of an interconnected whole and are inspired to take action to help humanity and the planet thrive. Now that you have an update on what the Institute of Noetic Sciences is all about, here are some suggested questions for group conversation. First, what, in your opinion, is the significance of IONS work both to you personally and to society at large? Second, what about IONS do you find most exciting and why? And thirdly, what type of topics would you like most to have featured in future IONS community group meetings? You, or the facilitator of this meeting, may pose other questions as you converse, initially in small groups of 3 or 4, and later expanding into a conversation among the meeting as a whole at such a time as seems appropriate. Please do this now. For your convenience, this slide will remain up for 30 minutes before the ending of this video.